listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. Today is August 18th, 2024, and this is episode 291 of Lighthearted. In a few minutes, we'll listen to a conversation with Sean O'Connor, Executive Director of the Rose Island Lighthouse and Fort Hamilton Trust in Rhode Island. First, I want to remind everyone of two dates that are coming up soon. First is our second annual U.S. Lighthouse Society Lighthouse Dance-Off. We're asking people to dance at a lighthouse to an original song called Meet Me at the Lighthouse. It can be one person or 1,000 or anywhere in between. It can be volunteers or staff of a lighthouse organization, students from a local dance school, or whatever you want. Dancing ability is not a requirement. Believe me, because I took part in this myself. We're looking for people to show spirit and creativity. Cash prizes will be awarded. See USLHS.org and look under What's New for the details. And on September 7th, that's Saturday, September 7th, from 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, we will be presenting what we're referring to as a virtual telethon celebrating the 40th anniversary of the founding of the U.S. Lighthouse Society. The event will be hosted by USLHS Executive Director Jeff Gales and me, and there will be lots of special guests, music, and a look back at some of our special events and podcast episodes. The final voting for the dance contest winners will be done during the event. It doesn't cost anything, but you need to register in advance to attend. Check uslhs.org under events for more details. So let's get on to today's interview. Located a mile offshore from Newport, Rhode Island, is Rose Island Lighthouse, which began service in 1870. The lighthouse is 35 feet tall. The light is 48 feet above the water. It consists of an octagonal lighthouse tower rising from the west side of a mansard roof on top of a 1 1/2 story wooden keeper's dwelling. The light lost its importance as a navigational aid with the construction of the Newport Bridge in 1969. In the 1980s, a group of dedicated local preservationists founded the Rose Island Lighthouse Foundation to protect the historic structure. The lighthouse has been restored to the 1912 to 1915 period, and it's been open to the public since 1992. You can now stay overnight at Rose Island for a taste of Lighthouse Service life. The Rose Island Lighthouse Foundation recently changed its name to the Rose Island Lighthouse and Fort Hamilton Trust to reflect the fact that the organization is also the steward of the island's fort buildings. The fort was named after Alexander Hamilton and was part of the first system of U.S. fortifications. Our guest today, Sean O'Connor, is the executive director of the trust. There's also a video version of this podcast, which you can see on the USLHS YouTube channel. Also joining in this conversation is Judianne Point, a volunteer for Pomham Rocks Lighthouse in Rhode Island and a frequent contributor to this podcast. Let's listen to our conversation with Sean O'Connor now. I am speaking today with Sean O'Connor, who is the Executive Director of the Rose Island Lighthouse and Fort Hamilton Trust. And also with us today is Judianne Point. Judianne, of course, has taken part in quite a few episodes of the podcast, and she's a volunteer with the Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse in Rhode Island, which is a chapter of the American Lighthouse Foundation, and she is also the first Vice President of the American Lighthouse Foundation. So, Sean, thanks so much for doing this today.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here with you both.
And Judianne, of course, thanks as always for being part of this as well.
I love being here with Sean. After all, we're sister lighthouses from one end of Narragansett Bay to the other.
Yes,
absolutely. Yeah, Rose Island and Pomham Rocks, I would say, I would call them siblings or sister lighthouses. You're absolutely right.
Yep.
Yeah, very, very similar.
Same architect.
Yeah. So let me start, Sean, by asking you about your own background. Where are you from? And I guess a two-part question. Where are you from and what led you to become the executive director of the Rose Island Lighthouse and Fort Hamilton Trust?
Yeah, I'm here from Newport County. Sometimes I'll tell people I'm from the cow towns outside Newport, because I'm not from the city of Newport. I'm from Tiverton, Little Compton, Rhode Island.
Sure.
And I've been in my role for almost 2 years now as executive director. And what a great time it's been. I'm honored to be stewarding the legacy of the place. But how did I get here? Well, for most of my for all of my career, I've worked in nonprofits for one, and I've typically worked in nonprofits that have a mission that involves connecting people with places. So, just to give you an example, I worked for quite a while at the National Geographic Society, and I worked in their education programs, which very much about connecting young people with special places, with important work, whether it had to do with environmental conservation or history. I mean, it spanned quite a lot of topics. So I had moved back to this area in Rhode Island about 7 or 8 years ago, and it was been very happy to be back here. And I was doing some remote work for a nonprofit in science education for a number of years. And I got sick of doing remote work for places that weren't here. I was really having more of an appetite for just working locally because that's what I'm passionate about is connecting people with special places.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do that, in my own life a little more directly, if that makes sense. So I had kind of taken a leap of faith and left that job, and I didn't know
Hmm.
exactly what was next. And it was that same summer that I visited Rose Island for the first time. In fact, I think my very, very first time I had paddleboarded out there, which people like to do. It's a mile, so it's not a beginner kayak or paddleboard. But if you look at the weather conditions and know what you're doing, you can absolutely paddle out there. And I did not wash ashore. I paddled up to the bird refuge side of the island, which
Yep.
maybe we'll talk about later. And the birds made it clear to me that this was their side of the island. And then a little while later, I went out with a local nonprofit called Bike Newport that took a summer youth camp out there. That was my first real introduction to the island. And then one thing led to another. I happened to stay out there a few weeks later for an overnight, which was so special. And then in October of that year, really, some people in the community thought of me, which was a great honor because there was this role open at the time looking for a director. And one thing led to another there, conversations with the board, and I like I said, had the honor of taking on the role because there's quite a legacy here at the Rose Island Lighthouse.
I'm sure you're out at the lighthouse a lot, but
Yes.
your office isn't actually at the lighthouse, right? Are you in
No.
Newport?
Yeah, we have an office at the Newport Shipyard, or the Safe Harbor Newport Shipyard, as it's called, and that is sort of right on the other side of Goat Island, so it's kind of tucked in there in the harbor. And we have a launch boat that we use to get to and from the island. That's where we keep the boat as well, and we have a small office there. And I'm usually on the island a couple of days a week. We have a small year-round team, and one of our other team members is our island manager. So he's out there, 4 or 5 days a week. But any day I'm on the islands is a great day, no matter what happens, for the most part.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the places, one of the islands, one of the lighthouses that's really pretty near and dear to me. I've been there many times over the years. Going back, well, I first saw it, I'm going to say, first time I remember seeing it for sure is 1989. I remember I was there for a lighthouse bicentennial event that the U.S. Lighthouse Society put on in Newport. And I remember seeing it from the Newport Bridge, and it looked pretty decrepit. It was boarded up at that time.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of progress and had a lot of good visits there over the years. And I'm actually used to calling the organization the Rose Island Lighthouse Foundation, but now it's the Rose Island Lighthouse and Fort Hamilton Trust. Can you say a little bit about that, how it's morphed into that?
Yeah, sure. It must have been about 5 or 6 years ago when that name change happened, a corporate name change with the nonprofit. And in the years leading up to that name change, there was a ton of work to preserve and well, restore the Fort Hamilton barracks. So there's so many layers of history on Rose Island, and it's really interesting that for the 100 years of the lighthouse keeping era, the entire time there was the lighthouse lot, which is about 1.5 acres, and there was the other 16 and a half acres that were many of those years, most of those years utilized by the military. So, I don't know if we probably won't dive into the whole history here. I'll leave a little bit to be explored by the listeners, but really we changed the name because, we wanted to elevate the fact that the history of Fort Hamilton Barracks is a really, really important part of the Rose Island history and of the regional history as well. So that allows us to just kind of own both aspects a bit more, and which aren't all the aspects of our nonprofit, because we also have environmental conservation in our work as well. So it's some really fun hats to wear.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit about why Fort Hamilton is historically significant?
Yeah, absolutely. I can. I'll try my best to sum it up because there are a few sort of key big touch points. One being, the first creation of Fort Hamilton. Construction began in 1798. So there had been, a lot of activity in the Newport area during the times of the American Revolution. The French were in Newport as allies to the early Americans. The British had occupied Newport, in those years leading up to 1798 and the Revolution. So Fort Hamilton was designed as one of the forts of the Narragansett Bay defensive coastal forts in this area. So 1798 into the 1800s, they pretty much abandoned this fort in favor of building out some of the other coastal defense forts like Fort Adams, which I'm sure many folks who have lived in Rhode Island or have been to Rhode Island will have heard about, which is also in Newport. So constructed then 1800s, not used very much, except as a quarantine hospital for victims of cholera and yellow fever, another interesting chapter in the island's history. And then it took on a really important role in the 1900s in both World War I, World War II, and the interim period, because Fort Hamilton Barracks, being designed as a cannonball-proof structure in 1798, lent itself very nicely to being a storehouse for explosive materials that were packed into torpedoes and other devices that were manufactured here at the Newport Naval Torpedo Station, which was headquartered on Goat Island. So Goat Island and Rose Island and Gould Island north of Rose all became part of this torpedo station. That was another really interesting and important era in the history of Fort Hamilton Barracks.
Can I just ask you a question, Sean, too?
Sure.
I've only been to Rose Island once, and that was when you gave us a tour when some of the board from Pomham Rocks came out. So I saw the lighthouse, of course, and I saw the barracks. Now, if I were to take a walk around the rest of the island, and what comes to mind is I saw some cool photos from the 1920s. If you look at that, you see all kinds of buildings having to do, I think, with the munitions that you were talking about, and no trees anywhere. If I were to take a walk, as long as the birds weren't nesting, all over the island, what would remain in other parts of the island? Do you see many remnants of those other buildings at all?
Yeah, you do. So you brought up a good point. There's a lot of the year where we can't go in that part of the island because it's closed for nesting season from March 1st to August 15th. But after August 15th, we cut back trails and work on habitat restoration. And there's quite a bit of the remnants of the 20th century World War I and II era infrastructure that was there. So just for example, there are 3 gun tubs on the island. So more specifically, anti-aircraft gun tubs. So these were big concrete structures that had a big, I believe it's a 90 millimeter gun in the middle, which was part of an anti-aircraft defensive force here in the Bay. So you'll see the foundation of those buildings. There's one actually on the lighthouse lot, which is where we have our solar panels now. The anti-aircraft gun's not there anymore, but the solar panels are. So there's quite a bit of sort of concrete and other kinds of infrastructure on that part of the island, which is really interesting to look at. And of course, we caution visitors to look at it only because some of it is sort of fragile and not a great state.
Is there a best time of year to take the walk around and see all of this?
Well, I mean, if you ask a local, we're going to tell you how much we love September in general. because the temps have cooled a little bit. The water's still warm. I love the way the landscape looks in September, and it's after bird nesting season, and we've cut back trails. And we have daily visitors come all the way pretty much until the middle of October. So even, that first half of October is lovely too. Yeah.
Yeah, as you're saying, the naval history in Newport is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Just so many aspects of it, and there's still a big Navy presence there today.
Yeah, we've got the Naval War College, Naval Underwater Warfare Center. So yeah, quite a bit. Yeah, we had groups from the Naval War College, which often are visiting officers from around the country and around the world, like a lot of foreign naval officers. I think we did 3 tours this fall. We went to the Naval War College Marina and picked them up, 18 of these officers, and brought them out to the island. Did a tour, of course, of the lighthouse, as well as some of the other grounds. And then they have some seminar work that they do right inside one of the barracks rooms. And we said, this is the barracks. We don't have electricity. This is a rustic space. And they're like, that's perfect for us. So,
cool.
They get their work done in that environment, which was pretty neat.
That is very neat. So let's get into the lighthouse a little bit more. I have featured Rose Island on this podcast before. We talk quite a bit about the history of the place. I don't want to get too deeply into it today, but I'm just wondering, for you personally, if there's a story or two related to the history, maybe especially the human history of the place, anything that especially stands out for you.
Well, to me, the fact that next year we're hitting the 40th anniversary of the nonprofit having formed and coalesced in 1985. So just that period of the mid 80s to the mid 90s, when the community came together, formed this organization, took a structure that was almost a total loss. I mean, it was not doing well after the U.S. government had decommissioned it in 1971. It really just had a lot of vandalism in the 1970s and early 80s. So the stories that I get to hear of that era of initial restoration are incredible. And I wouldn't get to do what I'm doing here. We wouldn't get to welcome the 5,000 visitors we have annually, if that community didn't have the foresight to say, let's protect this thing. Let's work with the city of Newport to obtain rights to this property from the U.S. government, and let's restore it. And everyone who pitched into that. So that is a really great era in the history of the place. I guess a little more distant than that, every day when I hop in on tours and give tours myself, of course, and I love talking about some of the young people that grew up on the island with their grandparents who were lighthouse keepers. So Wanton Chase with his grandfather Charles Curtis, and Paul Stedman with his grandfather Jesse Orton. So part of the first floor museum exhibit that we have has photos of that era and photos of these young people growing up there, helping with island duties alongside their grandparents and their family. And there's great, you probably both know this, but there's great books on those two boys and their childhoods on Rose Island that we have in the gift shop, which is such a gem to have captured those stories and to be able to share them out. So yeah, those are two that come to mind.
Sure. Yeah, I know the booklets you're talking about. I was so happy to see those published. That was great. I got a quick story to tell you related to Wanton Chase. I heard a ghost story about the place years and years ago. Let me back up from that a second and say that I knew Charlotte Johnson pretty well, who was the spearhead of the restoration in the early days.
Yes.
Yeah. So I remember I had read this somewhere that there was a ghost story, and I asked her and she laughed. The story I had heard was that Wanton Chase walked into the restored kitchen in the keeper's house and said something about, I can smell my grandmother baking cookies, and somebody took that to mean that he was saying her ghost was there baking he was smelling it because the ghost was baking cookies or whatever. But what he meant obviously was the memory came back to him. But somehow people get things on the internet and kind of run with them. So that got twisted. But anyway,
Yeah. We
Charlotte.
share that story, with guests on our tour because it's a really special one. And Charlotte Johnson, who is the originator of one of the key originators of the organization, still is a friend of the organization today, and visited with her family just last week, which was wonderful.
So let's move to the present day. Again, there's so much history we could talk about, but let's talk about what's happening at the lighthouse now. First of all, is it open for tours?
Yeah, it is daily. So we have a great partner in the Jamestown Newport Ferry, which is
Yes.
a privately run ferry that operates out of Jamestown, but has stops in Newport as well as on Rose Island. So, people, you buy a ticket and you pay a really modest fare to additionally be able to come onto Rose Island. And, you can come onto Rose, you can go to Fort Adams, you can, pop into downtown Newport, circle back to Jamestown. So that's great. So we really offer daily tours the middle of May to the middle of October, which is so great. We've been having a ton of visitors get off of the ferry this year. The majority of people get off because they want a tour. They're maybe first timers, and then we have a percentage of folks that get off who are like they've been on the tour probably a dozen times, and they brought a beach chair and a book, and they want to set up on that beach right behind you, Jeremy, in that photo. And we love that kind of visitor as well. And then we do have overnight guests, and we may talk about more about that actually stay in the historic lighthouse, as well as a couple of other historic structures, like a room in the Fort Hamilton Barracks. So, coming to Rose Island for an overnight is not like your average overnight anywhere. I mean, it's an educational experience. Every overnight guest is given a tour of the place, unless they've been a dozen times and are like, please, no more. But that's another way that we give tours is daily to our visitors.
I'm just
Sure.
curious. Excuse me, Jerry. I'm just curious about the logistics of that, Sean, because
Yeah.
I know when we give tours, people sign up, they go on a boat and they get to our island. But you don't always know, or the docents don't always know how many people are actually going to come for a tour because they don't sign up ahead of time. So is there
Right.
always a docent on the island there ready for them?
There is every day. So
Yeah.
that's, a
That's different.
big job for us to coordinate, but we do. Last week we had a group pop off the ferry. They, about 20 of them, they didn't want a tour. They brought their canvases. They wanted to do a plein air painting day. And so they've been before. They're from Portsmouth,
Yeah.
Rhode Island. They set up, I love when they come because they set up in every interesting angle you can think of, all different angles, and then they're all creating, these beautiful pieces. I really enjoyed this one woman who was just sort of, you see in Jeremy's photo there, to the one side of the lighthouse, there's the original oil shed for the lighthouse, which we now call our generator shed because we have a generator in it. She was down the hill from that, and she did this beautiful watercolor of the back of that oil shed only. And you think, oh, the back of an oil shed, that doesn't, but it, with the colors on the bastion wall that it sits atop, I mean, it was incredible. So long answer to your question, but logistically, yeah, we do our best to offer everyone that comes aboard onshore a tour. And also in the fall, we have this busy cruise ship season in Newport. People come from a lot of times the Midwest, I learned talking to visitors, and go on these fall New England cruises. And one of their excursions is to, come on to Rose Island. So September and October is a particularly intensive time for us for tours because we arrange that in advance on another boat, in addition to the daily ferry that's coming in and out. So, yeah.
Can you describe the accommodations, the overnight accommodations there?
Yeah. Well, sometimes when I talk about it, I say the keeper's apartment, which is the second floor of the lighthouse, is the cushiest. And what do I mean by that? I mean, it's the only accommodation with a full kitchen and a full bathroom. And for some travelers or visitors, that matters. Other people love the more rustic experience. Interestingly, with the Rose Island Lighthouse, there also was a foghorn structure on the island, which was a really important piece of maritime safety. So there was a certain point in the lighthouse keeping era where a second assistant keeper was added, because not only did they have the light to keep, they had the foghorn to run as well. So I just bring that up because at that time there was an expansion. There was a new kitchen, a new wing added onto the lighthouse. And so now in this new era, the second floor, which would have been the keeper's apartment, is one of the rentable accommodations. Other folks stay on the first floor of the lighthouse, which would have been the assistant keeper's accommodations. There's a chance I might have those reversed. But anyway, today we call it the museum floor. And that's really unique because when you stay on the museum floor, you share that floor with the public between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. daily. So you have your things tucked away, people are coming through for tours. And then after 4, it's the most peaceful place ever. The last ferry has left, and you enjoy it for the evening. There's not a full kitchen. You use the grills and the mini fridge. And then there's the Foghorn Cottage, really neat, that at one time it housed, a big steam oven to produce steam, to get pressurized and pushed through the horn to make the foghorn noise. It is now this really neat little cottage right on the water that people stay in. And there's also a room in the barracks as well. So many nights of the year, you might have, someone staying in the barracks room, using their grill. They brought their, food and beverages on. They pack in, pack out, brought everything on ice. Someone staying in the keeper's apartment, or other times like today, we have a group that kind of reserved it all together. So then they can share all the facilities. And we have outhouse bathrooms as well for visitors. We collect all our own rainwater. So water conservation is a big thing when you use our restrooms. You see signs on the wall that tell you, do not flush if you're just going number 1 and you're the first person to do so. We have a system we call the Tinkle Tally, and you'll have to come to the island to learn more about that.
We took a picture of it.
Yeah, that goes back a ways. I remember that years and years ago. That's been there a while.
Yes, yep. Periwinkle shells are used to track things and know when it's time to flush from our very limited water supply that we collect in a few different rainwater cisterns, including one in the basement of the lighthouse. And I know you all have a similarly designed rainwater cistern in the basement of the Pomham Rocks Lighthouse as well.
We do. We have, I think it's 4,900 gallons, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Beautifully restored as well on Pomham.
When the guests leave, obviously there has to be some kind of cleanup, tidying up. Do you have volunteers that do that work, or do you have hired staff?
We mostly the guests do it. So when you come to Rose Island, it's again so far from your average stay. It's educational. You also, put a little work in. We lay fresh sheets out for new incoming guests, linens. So we have our guests change their linens, make their beds, clean their rooms before they leave. And absolutely, by and large, guests are very respectful of the whole place and the history, and as well as what we ask of them. So, and then we do have our island docents, which in our case are hired staff, because there's quite a bit of responsibility we put on them. We have them check and sometimes make that bed when we have that guest that didn't get the memo, which, like I said, isn't very often, but certainly does happen.
Sounds like a well-oiled machine you got going there.
I like to think we've done a good job of oiling it.
I've stayed in the upstairs apartment, the cushy apartment, and I've stayed in the fog building, and really enjoyed both. This beautifully done, that room in the fog building.
Yeah, and so something neat with the foghorn. This was from you, Jeremy. You sent me, a number of files from the archives, and in one of them, I think it was from the National Archives, although it might have been one of the other sources, there was the architectural diagrams of the original architectural diagrams for the Foghorn Cottage. So
Mm-hmm.
we're going to get that printed out on vinyl to go on the wall in the cottage, which is really neat. So thank you for
Nice.
sharing some of those, archives that you've pulled together over time of our
Absolutely.
property.
Yeah, it's stuff that I've gathered, but what I sent you was also from the U.S. Lighthouse Society archives.
Yeah. Hmm.
So, but between the two, there's a lot, a lot
Yeah.
there. Yeah. So, what is the season for the overnight stays? Is it all year?
It currently, this year, it's April 1st till November 1st. We used to, for many years, have a tradition of off-season stays. More specifically, it was kind of a program where we would have people come stay, sometimes for a week at a time, maybe even more than a week, at a really reduced, modest rate. And we would put them to work. And I don't mean remaking the bed, I mean work. Like we would have them working on restoration projects. So it was kind of a whole program that you had to apply for, because obviously not everyone's going to be suited for that kind of work. We want to make sure it's the right kind of people. And I just bring that up because it's an interesting part of the history of the lighthouse. And it's something that we're seeing if it might be possible and make sense for us to bring back, because it's a really nice tradition. And I can certainly tell you, being on the island in the off season is like so special any time of year. But both the dead of summer, when the harbor and the bay are so filled with boats, is one
Mhm.
thing that's so special. But the complete opposite has its own specialness when there is absolutely no boat out on the bay, and
Mm-hmm.
you really get this sense of, I mean, it's certainly not the most remote lighthouse by not even close. We're a mile offshore, but it feels so remote when you're sitting
Mhm.
in the middle of the bay without any other boats in sight.
Yeah, I got to stay there in March, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So how far in advance do people need to make reservations to stay there?
Yeah, it's been really popular the last few years. So the system we used last year was, December 1st was the date where we opened the calendar for this year. And we do have members of the Rose Island Lighthouse. People have individual memberships or family memberships, and we do open the calendar for our members about 1 week early, because certain people know they want to come at a certain time, and that's just one of the member benefits. But things start to book out straight away, on December 1st when it opens. But now, there's maybe some stays here and there that people are still booking every day. With daily visitors and with overnight visitors, the opportunity to go up to the lighthouse tower is such a special thing.
Mhm.
Obviously, that was a major part of our organization's restoration efforts. And what you find in the tower is a replica polycarbonate Fresnel lens, a 6 order Fresnel lens. And to be able to just go up and be in the lens room and see that, and not only that, but pop out the hatch onto the outer gallery or
Mhm.
catwalk, is an experience in itself. So just wanted to shout that out, since we're already talking about just visiting in general.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that. The picture, for those watching this on video, picture behind me is before that replica lens was put in there. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
smaller light in there in this picture. But that replica lens made by
Yeah.
Dan Spinella of Artworks Florida is so beautiful. It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's a they people have called them the jewels of the lighthouse, and that's what that is. So it really added a lot to the as a piece of the historical fabric of the place that kind of brought back. So it's absolutely
Mm-hmm.
gorgeous. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
view from the top is great as well,
And
as
the
you
Now,
said.
view,
yeah.
yes.
Now tell the truth. If you bring somebody up there, are you going to tell them that it's not one of the original lights of the
I
lens?
do. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I do. Because it's so interesting
Because
that,
they may not be able to tell anyway.
yeah, yeah. And in Jeremy, you may know more about this than me, but Dan from Florida that created it, as I understand it, was like a Disney Imagineer. Like he worked for Disney in some
Uh,
way. Do you know?
yeah, animatronics, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
his.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
started doing these lenses quite a few years ago now, and he's done a lot. He's working on a
Wow.
first order lens for Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, North Carolina.
Wow.
Yeah, that's going to be incredible.
Yeah. And then just on the, I think any given year we, probably have, I don't know, I'd say average 5 wedding proposals on the island. And, usually a few of them are on the lighthouse tower.
Oh, that's
So,
nice.
I would imagine
yeah,
so. Yeah, I've
yeah,
been part of some of those at Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse, my local lighthouse. So there's
yeah,
something
yeah,
about lighthouses that lend themselves to that for
yeah.
sure. The romance of them, I guess. So you talk
Hmm.
about the limited water, not to kind of an awkward segue there, but you were
It's
talking
okay.
about the water supply earlier. So what about
Yeah.
electricity? How do you get electricity on the island?
Yeah. The originally there was a wind turbine that provided the lighthouse with all its electricity, because the only structure that has electricity is the lighthouse, as well as the former oil shed. Now we call it the generator shed. That's where our battery bank is. So a wind turbine, sent power to this battery bank in the generator shed. As I understand it, sometimes it's like I don't never know what the 100% truth is. A lightning strike took out the wind turbine some years back, maybe about 12 or so. We replaced it with solar. So we have a solar installation that sits in one of these anti-aircraft gun tubs, which is really just, if you're looking at Jeremy's background photo there, just down the hill really from where that oil shed is. That's where our solar is. So that's our only electricity, and especially in April and October, we do supplement the energy source in our battery bank by turning on our diesel generator. We carry out the diesel by hand, in cans. This time of year, we've had so much sun in the sky lately. We've been absolutely fine with our solar installation.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I remember the wind turbine well. I wasn't quite sure if it was still in use. I should have remember because I have been there since then. So
Yeah, yeah. The
yeah,
tower that held it is still there, except there's no turbine at the top, but there is a weather station on that tower, and it's I'd say it's privately run by a company called Weatherflow, I think. But it's a pretty important weather station for the area in terms of feeding into lots of the local forecasts and apps and things like that.
sure. Well, that's good that that's still getting some use.
Yeah.
So I know you have some education programs. Do you get a lot of school groups coming to the island?
Yeah, we do, especially in the summer. So a lot of our local summer camps
Right.
bring students out. And today, there were 2 local summer camps. There was supposed to be one and then one tomorrow, but it was going to rain tomorrow, so they doubled up on today. And school year, we do get school groups as well. We're always fundraising for education programs because the fact that schools, it's not just a bus, it's a bus and a boat. We can only take 18 people on our launch boat. So typically, if you might have 25 or say 50 students that want to come out with teachers and chaperones, a private charter needs to happen. And in school budget lines, there's not a lot of money for that these days. But we do get schools. We've got schools lined up for the fall, and we had some in the spring as well. But fundraising is important because I'd love to be in a position where we can pay for transport for these schools to be able to come. But you love having youth groups out. It's always been a part of our work, and in the, I want to say 40 years, but they were working on the restoration for the first decade. So let's say it's been an important part of our history for the last 30 years for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, that's great. That's just one of the most important things a lighthouse organization can do for sure.
Yeah.
Is the island also available for weddings? And you mentioned proposals, but can people
Yeah.
do their
Yeah.
proposal and then do the wedding on the island as well?
They can. Yeah. I've learned in my time as director, small weddings are our thing. I tell people, everyone, you can have anything short of a hurricane, and you can have a great 4-sided tent in one of the local venues, and you'll be good to go. That's not the case on an island with a dock that, sits facing the mouth of the Narragansett Bay. We have days, especially in like April, May, and October, when no boat is coming to Rose Island, which always makes it interesting with operations.
Yeah.
So we have times in those seasons where we simply have to cancel our overnight guest that had plans to come. So I always tell people planning a wedding, it's a lot easier to pivot a 15-person wedding than a 100-person wedding. So, but we do. We've had lovely events on the island while I've been there. We have some more lined up for this fall. One of our, famous pop culture facts is that the actress Jennifer Lawrence had her rehearsal dinner on the island in 2019, which was quite a star-studded affair,
I'll
as
bet.
I understand it. And they did a whole big setup with the big tent and everything. And I heard that the weather conditions on that day were a little bit dicey, but it worked out in the end for them, and it was a lovely event as I hear it. So yeah.
I had forgotten about that. I think I heard something at the time, but what's her Newport connection?
No clue. I've speculated that her husband is, I think, from New York, and so maybe he had a connection to this region, more likely, because I know she's not from the Northeast originally. So
Yeah.
I don't know, but we're waiting to see if maybe they'll come back someday to celebrate an anniversary.
Yeah. Maybe some of us should try to contact her to see if she could support lighthouse preservation.
That's a great
Something
idea.
something to
Yeah.
store in the back of my mind, but it can be difficult to reach these
Yeah,
people. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I was looking at your website, and something I saw that I don't remember hearing about before is an artist residency. What's that all about?
Yeah, this is going to be our second year we're doing it in September. So we launched it and ran it for the first time, 2023. It's a week in September where we open up the island for Rhode Island-based artists to come stay for a week in the island accommodations and work on a project that can be uniquely inspired by the Rose Island environment or history. We had 7 artists that stayed in 2023. It's a new program for us, something we're still fundraising for. Artists are given a small stipend to just help offset some costs for them, but ultimately just come spend a week with us and work on their art. So we'll be running it for the second year, starting Monday, September 16th. And I think we'll have a day where we, ask our artists to kind of showcase what they've been working on. And that following Saturday, which I believe is September 21st. So that'll be an event that we'll be publicizing soon.
Cool. That's great. That's another. I love seeing tie-ins to the arts community with lighthouses and
Yeah.
music. I mean, it's all great stuff. And it's
Yeah.
a way of reaching a different audience. And
Like we've said, lighthouses seem to inspire engagements and romance. I mean, there's, been, I think, 1 or 2 music videos shot on Rose Island since I've been there. You've been involved maybe with.
I
Yeah,
shot and edited music before you were there, but it was
yeah,
about
yeah,
10 or 11 years ago. I
yeah.
made a little
So
music video there. Yeah.
there you go. So there's been many over the years, and it seems lighthouses inspire creativity in some ways too, just with their symbolism or whatever, however you might interpret them.
Absolutely. So back to the wildlife refuge, we talked about it
Hmm.
earlier. Is there a
Yeah.
specific schedule? Maybe it's different every year when it's closed in the spring and then opened in the fall. Does it?
No, it's so interestingly, the wildlife refuge side of the island, which is about 90% in terms of the acreage, is owned by our organization and is sort of governed by a conservation easement that was put together by the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. And we have ongoing bird research that happens as well, where we learn about our nesting birds and visiting birds. Both the DEM as well as our partners at Salve Regina University do that. So every year, the nesting season runs from April 1st to August 14th is the final day. So we're kind of in the tail end of it now. And on the lighthouse lot adjacent to the other big wildlife refuge lot, let's just say the black-backed gulls and the herring gulls, they don't know the boundaries of the wildlife refuge. So we have a lot of young gulls on the island right now. They're also just I mean, there are other species that are so much more, I mean, what's the word? They don't want
Rare.
anything to do
Oh.
rare, or they don't want anything to do with human development. So, they would never nest, where visitors are just going to walk by them. But the gulls are a little less precious with their nesting. So you'll see a lot of young gulls. The Canadian geese that nest also on our lot are they're already off by now.
Mhm.
The geese young grow really quickly. So yeah.
I know from experience you don't want to go too close to a blackback gull nest with eggs in it or babies. I really learned not there, but on another island. I learned my
Well,
lesson.
you visit Rose Island between, I was going to say June 1st, maybe I'll even say May 15th and August 1st, and you'll also learn that lesson really quickly. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Well, I have the DM did their survey about a month ago. They counted 102 active nests for herring gulls, 62 active nests for great black-backed gulls, and then 35 breeding pairs of glossy ibis, which is
Wow.
really neat because so I guess they didn't necessarily identify nests, they're just breeding pairs. I think I just got their data this morning. But that's interesting because we haven't seen many glossy ibis on the island for the last few years. As I'm not, a bird biologist, but as I understand it, populations can sometimes have like phases where they're there for some years and then they're not. But anyway, I got to walk back on the wildlife refuge with the DEM biologist. That's the only time we can be in the wildlife refuge this time of year, and I got to see a lot of these breeding pairs, and it was really incredible.
That is, I've only seen one time. I remember seeing glossy ibises in the Plum Island Refuge in Massachusetts. But
Yeah,
that's really exciting. Another thing I've seen when I was there was American oyster catchers.
yep,
Yeah,
yep.
I
We
think.
had 3 breeding pairs observed, and one pair was with young.
Hmm.
So those are lovely little. I mean, hearing the sound that they make, when you're staying on Rose Island in the evening is one of the really special parts.
Hmm. They're really unique birds with the long, thin beak, and they have brown and orange on them. Very, very interesting. I think they have
Yeah.
orange, don't they? I'm trying to picture them.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
they
they
do.
do.
And
red
they're
beak or something.
Yeah,
yeah, or like
yeah,
a
red
deep,
beak.
deep
That's right.
orange red
Yeah.
beak. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let me ask if there's anything else that we haven't talked about, anything interesting current projects going on, anything coming up on Rose Island?
Yeah, I mean, 2 things. One is in the lighthouse. We've been working on a project this past year to create new museum labels in the first floor, as well as some other like areas, like at the base of the lighthouse lantern room and in the lantern room. So we offer guided tours, but of course, with all the visitors that we have, there might be a moment where they didn't come on the tour, and then they are invited to go into the lighthouse. So we're going to basically, it's a new installation that's going into the museum floor, so people can have more of a self-guided experience. So I'm really excited about that. I think it's really going to enhance what it is to come into the first floor of the lighthouse. There's also, like, for example, when you're up in the base of the lighthouse tower, there's an inscription in the original plaster. I don't know if you remember seeing this, and it says Andre Roll, Staten Island, 1869.
Hmm.
Andre Roll was someone who was working at the Rose Island Lighthouse when they were constructing it in 1869, and he left this inscription in the plaster. They uncovered it during the restoration. So when you look at it through this plexiglass that was put over, you can't really tell what it says. So we're adding like a new label so you can, no visitor will miss that opportunity to kind of understand what's going on behind that plexiglass. And so that's one. Second thing I'm really excited about in the barracks. So that's a 265-foot long structure. There are 9 rooms in it. We're actually going to be turning 2 of those rooms into new museum space, new exhibition space. So the lighthouse is only so big. The first floor is an exhibit space about what life was like in that lighthouse in the 1910s. That's when that floor is restored too. It's about lighthouse keeping. It's about Rose Island lighthouse keeping. So there's, as we've talked about, there's all these other layers of history. So we're gonna be cultivating space in the barracks to have exhibitions to talk about, the military history, indigenous history on the island, as well as natural history. So
Fantastic.
that's, yeah. Hopefully we'll have it's like a version of it
Yeah.
available for people to visit next season.
Wow.
I have to say, and I was blown, well, no pun intended, but I was blown away when I went into the barracks and I saw the room that you have set aside for lodging for your guests.
Yeah.
The thickness of the walls and everything. And you said you're gonna have
Yeah.
two new rooms now for exhibits and all
Yeah.
for the rest. That's fabulous.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just had a question too about the lighthouse. Now, you have original furnishings and things, belongings from Wanton Chase and from
Yeah.
his keeper grandfather as well.
Yes and no. So like the stove that we have
Yeah.
is a model that Wanton's grandmother would have been baking sugar cookies on, the same model. And it's sourced
Okay.
locally here from Newport, but it wasn't the exact stove. We have china that was in use by Wanton's grandfather, Charles Curtis, that's on
Mhm.
display. So some things vary. They're sort of replicas or they're from that period of time.
Mhm.
Because the lighthouse had keepers from, the early 1870s and
Right.
up until 1970. So when Charlotte and the originators worked on that restoration, because of the connection with Wanton Chase, who grew up there as a young boy, he was a consultant at the time that said, this is how the museum floor looked when it wasn't a museum, when it was our
Mhm.
home. And so a lot of how it's been set up now is based on Wanton's memories and recollections.
Got it.
Some objects, but a lot of, replicas or things we've been able to source.
I'm going to ask you a surprise question, okay? And you can, if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to answer it.
Okay.
We'll move on. That question is the lighthouse haunted?
uh, let's talk about it. I don't think I probably don't have a very fulfilling answer for maybe people who are intrigued by that question. Guests tell us of their own experiences all the time. And of course, there's, search on YouTube, Rose Island Lighthouse Haunted, and you'll find, various series that have been shot there before, both in the lighthouse as well as the barracks. So I always kind of end up answering that question in an unfulfilling sort of neutral way, which is, I'm not really sure, but
Yeah.
I hear of stories all the time. And as I tell anyone who's nervous about that, well, nothing bad ever happens, very thankfully. So if it is haunted, at least it's, by
Benign.
um benign spirits.
Yeah.
But especially like people talk about hearing footsteps on the lighthouse stairs, which are thought to be, the lighthouse keeper Charles Curtis, who was the lighthouse keeper there for like 30 years,
Mhm.
going up to check the light at night. And
Yeah.
then this winter, we were like, one of our key team members stayed there to work on some restoration projects. And when the heating system goes on, it sounds like creaking on the stairs. So we're like, maybe that's it. And I was like, well, I'm not sure. What if people hear that in the summertime? So yeah,
Yeah.
that's,
Well, I always say I'm an open-minded skeptic. So
yeah.
I completely accept what you're saying and I completely understand. So thank you for your honest answer to
Yeah,
that question.
absolutely.
So a final question, okay, and this is for bonus points. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
So trivia.
No, it's not trivia. What is not trivia at all? It's the opposite of trivia. What is your favorite thing, or what has been your favorite thing about your involvement with Rose Island?
Building on the history and the legacy. I mean, I don't want that to sound too generic, but it really, I really feel what a special place Rose Island is, not just to the historical record, but to the community, and especially in Newport and Jamestown. Folks who are my, neighbors and community members that work so hard to make it happen. It feels really, really rewarding to get to kind of continue stewarding that. Again, I'm like does that sound cheesy? But that's my real answer in how I feel about it, as well as just getting to spend my own time on that place, and enjoying the landscape, enjoying, the preservation work, and everything that goes into being an executive director of a pretty interesting, dynamic organization like Rose Island Lighthouse and Fort Hamilton Trust.
Not a cheesy answer at all. You touched on a lot of important points there, and I give you a gold star for that answer.
Oh, thank you.
Judianne, anything else you want to ask or add?
It's been an honor to be here, both with you, Jeremy, and with Sean, because I love the fact that I'm sure this is in other places as well, but here in Rhode Island, we're really a community of lighthouses, and we
Yeah.
take care of each other. And the fact, Sean, that you reached out to us to come and see what we're doing at our museum, then we came and we visited you. And I'm a thief of ideas. I like to listen in and, borrow
Yeah.
some things and bring them back.
Absolutely.
So
Mhm.
yeah, I think for our own survival, we work together, and I think it's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing.
Yeah. We definitely want to come back in the fall, because you all are, we want to be, and we can be learning from the work that your team at Pomham's doing. And we've got our new island manager, as well as one of our other key captains and staff, who I was just talking about it with her this week. Please, like, we got to go up to Pomham. And I said, I'm sure we can figure it out
Give us a
for the
date.
fall. So yeah.
Right. Awesome.
Judianne, maybe you should start a Rhode Island Lighthouse Society.
Yeah, just something else
Like-
I need to do.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, you don't have enough to do.
It's a
But-
thought. It's a thought.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure it has to be official. You can still network and share ideas.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's why I like to meet everybody in person and go visit. It's fun.
Right.
Yeah, and for us, Beavertail's close, and
Oh, yeah.
they've got a great
Yeah.
board and museum, and
They're
I've met
coming-
you all.
They're coming in
Yeah.
August. The board is coming to Pomham in August. I know they
Oh,
visited
great.
you. So yes.
Yeah, but there's some of our other. We think of Pomham as like our true sister sibling lighthouse, but there's some of our other lighthouses that I don't know the teams as well. So that'll be nice to make those connections.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, Sean and Judianne, this has been great. Really, I don't need to tell you, it's a special place. It's been a special place to a lot of us for many years. And from where I sit, yeah, you're lucky to be involved with that organization and that lighthouse. So,
I am. Yeah.
but thank you for what you're doing today and continue to do. I hope to get there next year and see the new work that you're doing.
Yeah.
That's very, very exciting. I haven't been there in a few years, so I need to get back. So this has just been great today, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Oh, happy to do this with you all. So thank you.
For more about Rose Island, visit roseisland.org. On this podcast, I often talk about how various lighthouses are special to me, and it's always true. Believe me, sincerely, it's always true. I've been involved with lighthouses for almost 40 years, and a lot of them hold special memories. It's definitely true of Rose Island. I've visited the island or photographed the lighthouse at least 15 times. I think it may be more like 20. Over the years, I've spent the night twice. Just thinking about it makes me want to go back as soon as I can. The city of Newport is always a great place to visit as well, although it gets super busy in the summer. But I love it there. So a reminder again to check out USLHS.org to learn about everything the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers, and to get the details on our dance contest and our special virtual event on September 7th. Next week's episode will feature a conversation about Cedar Island Lighthouse on Long Island, New York, and the group that's working to restore it. Until then, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening, and keep a good light.
All in my house, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.